Hello, welcome to the Naked Chapel. I am Mark, and welcome to our project. Naked Chapel is an opportunity to gather together and share with comments or with guests about how we would change church for the better. What kind of ingredients from wider society would we like to kind of bring in and just change the kind of DNA of church, obviously keeping Jesus and God in there, of course. Tonight we're actually going to do things a little bit differently. I've only got one other person with me tonight, and that is Paul, which I'll just bring on now. Good evening, Paul. How are you doing?
Hello, not too bad. How about you tonight?
I'm all right, thank you. I'm all right. I've just realised that I need to change my titles. I'm all right, I think. It's a little bit strange because we haven't got the usual group of people. It's not that they've offended me or anything like that. It's just that everybody was busy. I thought we'd just kind of take an opportunity to just chill things down a little bit and just kind of ease into a one-on-one rather than kind of lots of people chatting. I'd also thought tonight we could do it as a bit of an experiment and go live on Twitch as well. So just folks, wherever you're tuning in from, whether on Facebook or on Twitch, just comment and say hello, or if you'd like to add your own contributions of what would you sort of change in church, in chapel, to kind of, I don't know, just mix it up a little bit, or like that kind of blue sky thinking. What would you do? So please feel free to comment over the next 40, 50 minutes. I think we often kind of average about 55 minutes, I think. And Paul will be kind of overseeing comments, and I'll be kind of introducing our topics, which I've actually chosen some as a bit of a change from tradition, and Paul has chosen some as well. So should we launch straight in, Paul?
Yeah, why not?
Good. So first of all, I'm going to go with one of my own, if that's all right, and it's going to be a house band. And I realise that we might have kind of worship groups, we might have organists, we might have pianists, we might have various musicians in church, but I just kind of like this idea of having like a resident house band, and like a proper arranged, do you know what I mean, like a proper kind of group of musicians. I'm about to say worshippers, but musicians, and I'm not even particular about the style, because I think all of them have got their own things, but just like a proper kind of ensemble of musicians, and who are kind of, dare I say, responsive. And do you get what I mean in that? Like that they're kind of listening, and that they're quick to be able to start playing stuff, and not necessarily like in a background music, here's a call to the altar sort of thing, but just like, you know, if you're kind of talking about stuff and people just respond to kind of go, oh yeah, you know, like the challenge of the church, play a bit of Mission Impossible, or, you know, I don't know, I'm maybe talking myself
musical break as the readers come up, that type of thing.
Yeah
just music.
Oh, everyone's got theme music. I hadn't even thought about that. That suddenly sounds worrying, but yeah, that sort of thing. What do you think, Paul? What do you think to that kind of idea?
I think that could be quite fun. I'd quite like the idea of adding in some musical responses. In my case, it would probably be when a joke falls flat. There'd be quite a few of those in there.
Kind of thing. Is that?
Yeah, maybe a little bit more of a flourish.
Oh, okay.
Music's fun. It lets us emphasize points, and actually, if other people are picking that up and maybe emphasizing things that you didn't notice as well.
Yeah. I was going to say, I've not really kind of thought it completely through regarding kind of backing music, and would I actually want kind of the house band to kind of respond during a sermon, for example, of just like kind of the dun 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 dun. Do you know, I wouldn't really want it to kind of get kind of quick paced or otherwise, or like if you're kind of running out of time as a preacher to kind of diddle boom, you know. But I think just kind of, you know, that kind of to help atmospherics, but not to overcomplicate it, not to overthink it, not to be overproduced, like so overproduced. It's that kind of just to be able to help the mood a bit, really. And I think that's where I'd want to start off with a bit of a house band, and also just kind of people who kind of can think on their feet a little bit, to say actually this song might fit better here. And obviously, as part of a house band, it would be good to have a house kind of tech team that can also quickly respond to the change of hymns or songs or otherwise. And we both laugh at this because we are kind of our circuit tech team, or some of our tech team, I guess, individual churches, but so across more of the circuit rather than the individual churches. But yeah, so I would like to have a sound engineer in there as well, if it's up to my imagination.
Maybe some lighting design as well. We're getting quite theatrical.
Well, yeah. Well, maybe save that a bit for later. But yeah, no, I'm not too bothered about lighting necessarily. It's just kind of that music side of things, and sometimes it's just kind of a bit. I don't want to say dry, but I do want to say dry. And it feels quite like, you know, like the typical 5-hymn sandwich sort of stuff. And, you know, I've got to put my hands up to that. I'm sometimes just as bad as that as next. But just to be able to allow ourselves to just kind of mellow with the music and just kind of gently move from one bit to another and allow the music to continue to play, I think would be lovely.
Is it something about if you're going to have worship and prayers and a sermon and bits of talks, that the whole lot is actually joined together and flows together, rather than we're having some songs, now we're praying, now it's the readings, now it's the sermon, and the music almost helps to link it together?
Yeah, I think so. And that reminds me, I should have had to put a little bit of background music on. There we go. It helps, doesn't it? It just helps. Okay. I don't think anyone else has got any comments about that. I don't think anyone's said anything at all.
In fact, so far, no.
It's obviously the guests that people come for usually. But feel free, folks. Feel free to comment your view on a house band or music during a service. We're now going to move on to our next subject, but I'm sure we could dip back if anybody comments. So, Paul, I would like you to introduce your first one, which I've just gone down the list of your offerings, and it is science.
Now, this is a tricky one. People are kind of a bit scared of science, I guess, at times, particularly in church environments. And it's a tricky one for me because my wife is a trained scientist, is next door, so she will pick up anything I get wrong and probably slip me a note. So if I change my answer mid-sentence, you know why. And yeah, I can't talk about science from a scientist perspective. I can talk about it from a history and philosophy of science perspective. I can talk about it from the perspective of having tried to plan services about creation and the environment, and trying to get my head around some of the science. And I think one of the things we need to do is actually bring some science in properly when we're talking about this, and bring scientists in to talk about these topics in a way that is a bit more approachable for people. But also so we get it right, because a lot of I've heard plenty of sermons where someone says, "Oh, and science shows this," and they'll give an example, and it's completely and utterly wrong. And it's painful, but it puts people off as well.
Yeah. So just for clarity, it's kind of a proper scientific perspective, or like the inclusion of science and kind of maybe some of the contemporary kind of science, not necessarily. I almost want to say that rather than just token science, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Well, scientism is almost sort of the belief in science, and I think actually a lot of Christians have fallen into the trap of having a belief in science rather than seeing science as a tool and as a way of exploring and understanding the universe. Science isn't going to provide any of the answers in and of itself, and often we don't understand what we mean by science, or we'll talk about the scientific method as if it's a completely and utterly objective thing, when in actuality you talk to most scientists, there is no scientific method per se. There are methods depending on what experiment you're doing and what you're hoping to find out.
I'm sure I'm going to do him complete injustice here, but when I was at college, I studied under the Professor Reverend David Wilkinson, and that was an absolute joy and pleasure. I don't know if you know David Wilkinson, but I think his first doctorate was in astrophysics. And therefore, when he's kind of teaching stuff about kind of creation, there's some of the calculations that he's made is part of the Big Bang stuff. That is completely paraphrasing and kind of just reducing David's vast knowledge down into about 30 seconds. But he was a very knowledgeable gentleman, and I think he's fantastic in the way that he takes science and doesn't say, don't hide in the gaps of science. Don't just kind of go, oh, well, you understand that bit, but God's in this little mystery nugget. I actually say you can actually use science to understand God better, rather than to pitch science against religion, which I think is sometimes the pitfall that we find ourselves in these kind of very general, vague swaths of, well, this is what religion thinks, this is what science thinks. And I think you've already mentioned that actually, science is much more broad. We're much more broad as a faith, and yet it's easy to be almost anecdotal with kind of religion and science and that verses. So I didn't know whether at first you were going to be talking about kind of involving science experiments and things, or welcome to Trinity Sunday, we're going to explore this with a exothermic reaction, or I don't know. I'm making it up. I'm not the scientist either, really. I
don't see any reason why, if it's appropriate, you couldn't almost do a science lesson as part of a service. But not in the terms of, and this experiment shows how we could visualize the Trinity, because I've seen that one done on numerous occasions, and it's painful. And also, any physicist will tell you that experiment probably also isn't accurate, and what you're saying from it doesn't work within the bounds of what they'd be doing. It does both an injustice when you try and use it like that. But actually, looking at it, how can we understand creation? There's all sorts of things within science that we could bring out to understand the impact of global warming. And how human action can help to mitigate some of the effects of human action. But not ever viewing it as an answer to the problem. Because science is never going to answer that problem, but it might help give some of the tools to answer that problem.
Yeah. Thank you. It's been interesting. Folks, feel free to comment whether you kind of like the idea of bringing in science to church services or otherwise, or still any comments about a house band as well. We're going to move on, I think, to our next subject, and I like this one. This is one that kind of struck me very early on in this project about exploring kind of this blue sky thinking, and this is Banksy. And now I'm not asking kind of Banksy to sneak into one of my church services or buildings and kind of spray paint a mural so I can sell it, but I just like that kind of investment in an idea and the creativity of an idea of doing something that's kind of challenging in an art form that can maybe a little bit socially injustice driven, but it is that kind of, here's an issue right in front of us, what we kind of maybe almost take for granted, and here's like a really clever image about it. And I like almost that idea that it's anonymous as well, because then you can't kind of, it's harder to argue. It almost feels more objective because there's somebody without their personality on display, if that makes sense. Though, yeah, do you know what I mean? It's that kind of anonymous artist idea, but also incorporating that kind of social. Do I say profit? Don't know, but that kind of idea. And to turn up on a Sunday with like a piece of artwork that's just been anonymously dropped off on the theme of the lectionary or something like that. Maybe not, but do you know what I mean that sort of that idea? I just thought it would be quite profound to kind of have that sort of thing. So Banksy, if you are watching, here are my churches. No, it would be lovely.
Stuart's reactions to that.
Well, I've got to say, we did at one of my old churches. Changing my camera view. At one of my old churches, I remember we got somebody had come in and graffitied on the front doors, and it went around the corner a little bit, and it was hilarious because what they'd done is it was something like now I've got to remember it now. God is the opiate of the masses, is what they'd tried to write. So I think it's quite a, dare I say, an obvious one. It's like a down with religion sort of label, but God is the opiate of the masses. And what was funny is that because they'd written around the corner, they'd actually lost the ES on the side. And so it said, God is the opiate of the mass, which kind of then has a different connotation about kind of communion. And I'm there kind of going, in a funny sort of way, they're right. Is that God is the opiate of the... Anyway, but it really, whilst it was sad, it was frustrating for the, as you said, as the property stewards, it was an interesting talking point in the following days and weeks. And that was on the front of the building. And what was really nice was that there was some guys from, I think it was like drug rehabilitation or something like that, who kind of came along. And they just knocked on our door and said, rang me up, sorry. And they just sort of said, we really want to repaint this for you. And we're like, yeah, brilliant. And if I'd stayed with that church longer, or if it wasn't for the fact that it eventually closed, I think I would have really liked to have just had a mural wall where the locals could have just spray painted stuff on, as long as it wasn't rude. And that's it, because it surprises some people. I actually do like graffiti when it's done well, and it's not properly offensive. And I guess that's maybe the, I don't like sweary, I don't like offensive, but I guess it's getting that right level. And if it's ruining anything, obviously, then it would be upsetting a property steward. So what do you think to Banksy in the church? Anybody? Paul?
I quite like the idea. I don't know whether we'd necessarily be prepared for some of the issues that he might challenge, but that could be an exciting opportunity to think about things that maybe we wouldn't anyway.
Do we know that
people talking?
Do we know Banksy's a he?
We don't. I think that's a bit of an assumption.
Yeah, I don't know if I mentioned that either. Yeah, sorry. It was just sort of as you said. I was like, yeah, I guess we do assume that it is a he. Anyway, but no, sorry. I don't mean to pick you on that. I was just interested. Carry on. Sorry.
No, I think it would be an interesting challenge, and I do like the idea of exploring themes through art, and graffiti is definitely an art form, especially if, as you said, it's done well.
Yeah, I remember seeing somebody doing some graffiti artwork, and I just came along and I was having my lunch and I was just watching, and the guy was just like apologetic, kind of going, "No, it's all right. I'm paid to do this," and I was like, "No. It looks really good. I'm just enjoying you, kind of getting on and doing this thing because it's awesome." And the guy was just taken back that I was appreciative, and that I think he was just so used to people harassing him because they thought he was doing something, offensive or illegal. But yeah, I just like that idea of anonymous art and that ability to share art, I guess, really, because I think art can sometimes be downgraded or a bit like, I guess I don't want to say that I want to just get away with doing like a sermon, an art, share an art piece instead of a sermon. But actually, sometimes I just think art can help us just explore a theme a little bit more, a bit more pondersome or otherwise. But I do say this because I do like doing art as well. So maybe I just kind of want to be able to express myself in that way a little bit as well.
I know people that do similar things, not quite graffiti. My dad especially does artistic interpretations when he's been listening to sermons or sitting in a service, and he will sketch something out and then draw it in later on. My mum does some similar things and does some incredibly interesting, not quite abstract paintings, but there's a lot to read into the colours and the shapes that you see in there. And it is always a reaction to something that's going on or something that's being said. I think that's quite interesting to do.
I mean, I remember doing it as a student. I used to draw and kind of illustrate as I went on. But yeah, I think there is something about being able to theologically reflect through art and through creativity. And I think that could be something exciting as well.
The other one that I've seen done and taken part in was including art as part of worship. So it was alongside our house band and a congregation full of people singing along with them. There were artists with massive canvases that were painting on the wall of the church. Or in one case, I think they actually took up about half the floor for it. And another time, people were encouraged with post-it notes just to do a picture of, how they interpreted this particular verse. There were some amazing responses coming out of that.
As I say, I've actually had the privilege of doing that. I've been invited to do an artist kind of an installation sort of thing as the service has gone along. And the frustrating thing for me was they'd got this massive canvas, and I'm like going, I don't have the physical time to cover all of this, and it was really disappointing for me personally, because I was just like, I just had to quickly scroll, and I was trying to reflect as the person was preaching. And I think if I'd had maybe a bit of a heads up about what they were talking about, and dare I say a bit more of a say of what medium that I could have used, because it just was really obvious that I felt as if I'd not brought the right thing to cover the canvas with, or that they'd not provided the right thing to cover the canvas with, and I think it just felt a little bit flat because I didn't. Anyway, we're going down a bit of a rabbit hole, but yeah. So Banksy, if you are watching, then please feel free to share a church art with us, please. We're going to move on, and Paul, I can't help. Pardon?
We've got a comment.
Oh, fantastic. We started to do art in our huge window that faces onto a busy roundabout during the lockdown. We've carried on a bit. For examples, yeah, of course, yeah, because during kind of lockdown, there was those opportunities, weren't there, to share. Thank you, Kate. I'd be interested to know what sort of things you did, sharing some ideas. But yeah, I think lockdown was a moment, wasn't it, for where we were kind of, scratching out the walls and kind of going, what could we do? So you did that at Scardo Methodist Church. That's fantastic. Brilliant idea, and a good way just to kind of help people think a little bit more, and to that excuse of having some artistic input into our church message. I'm going to move on, Paul, to your next one, and I can't help but feel as if there's a bit of a theme emerging here. So your first one was science. Your second one is history. Are you going down like a curriculum, or are you saying that we're uneducated here in the church, or is this in the same way to the science? Do you want to explain?
Well, this one is in many ways a little bit more of a passion. The science I fell into through my PhD being in history of science and through being involved in a project called Church Scientific, which was philosophy, science, and theology, and encouraging scientists to get involved and talk about their faith in their science. The history, I've always loved history and really, really enjoy it. But again, I think this is coming from, I get a little bit frustrated with the sort of pop history that we often get on TV shows and the really limited understanding of history that we get and how we interpret it. My frustration in the church is that people often mean, when they say history, they mean tradition. We get the two a bit mixed up and think that tradition and history are the same thing. Whereas history is what I might use to look at why traditions came into being, what was going on in society when that tradition, as it were, started. And I think it's something I've come to a little bit more recently as well, preparing services. So I'm getting ready for next Sunday at the moment, and I think it's the service loosely based around the Good Samaritan. And as a historian, the first thing I do is go and look at some of the history, and suddenly realizing how much I didn't know about Jewish history of that period, and how a contemporary audience would have listened to that parable and what they would have understood about it, and how different that might be from how we understand it as a Western Christian society today. And actually having that historical perspective has changed the way that I appreciate it, and actually changed the way I appreciate the artistry of that storytelling as well.
So what you're saying there, Paul, is that you're wanting local preachers to do their homework properly. Is that what you're getting at? Is that?
Well, I think again, there's also a thing of, actually, if when we're studying the Bible, we are talking about a text that is historical, that has historical roots, but all too often we don't look at those and we don't appreciate them. And that includes looking at how our translations have come into being and what was going on when a book was when the text was translated. What were the issues that people were dealing with at the time, and why did they translate things in that way? And I think the thing that really threw it into light for me was suddenly discovering, and this for me was a discovery, that the fact that for Jews of Jesus' time there were multiple different ways of reading the Torah. And the one that Jesus was coming to from the sort of this oral tradition was one that actually looked at the history of events when bits of the Torah were recorded and explained them and took them into account when interpreting them for what was the modern day. And all too often we don't do that anymore. And we don't realise what that meant for Jesus approaching those scriptures either.
Cool. Thank you, Paul. Thank you for including history in that. I'm just going to kind of reverse a little bit, because I asked Kate about what she did with her art stuff, and she said about she just shared on here most major festivals, Remembrance Day, etc. And that for me just kind of reminded me of I'm sure other people do this, but I'm aware that kind of sometimes is co-op funeral service tend to use those kind of festival days times to that. When you're an undertaker's, what do you put in your window? It can be really difficult. Whereas I think I've seen the co-op on a number of occasions, and other funeral services as well, kind of it just employ kind of artists to do like the chalk pen kind of pictures and things. There's one here in the town here which do fantastic kind of Christmas scenes and bits and pieces like that. So maybe that is an opportunity or an encouragement for churches to think about what do we have in our windows or on our windows in that sort of artistic sort of way. But anyway, so I realise that has come away from history, but I find it an interesting one, because I sometimes explore history with folk when people talk about Methodism, and I kind of explore that, and And for example, how important the Civil War, Independence Day, folks. How the American Civil War was kind of really vital in the kind of, I don't want to say the success of Methodism in America, but when you've kind of got English missionaries going across with kind of the Church of England kind of stuff, of course they're going to get killed. But people Methodist missionaries going across, teaching locals how to believe in God and become Methodists, they own it for themselves. And again, I'm doing a really bad job of history, surmising, condensing kind of American English history into 30 seconds. But do you know what I mean? It's just amazing. It's just really interesting to see how the wider War of Independence impacted Methodism over the Anglicans doing their mission in the Americas. But yeah, it's quite fascinating, I find. But again, I'm maybe one for this kind of thing, that I don't necessarily bring that to a Sunday morning. I bring that to people who are kind of really interested to talk about that sort of thing. But anything beyond Wesley and Methodism isn't really my forte. But that's where books and commentaries I kind of rely upon.
Yeah. So, I think the other areas that I find it interesting to look at this, there've been lots of debates recently about technology and its place in the church, and why do we want to use technology? We didn't have any of these newfangled PowerPoints or anything like that, and it was better then. But when you look at history, one project I was involved with was about the history of electric lighting in churches. And it's great fun. I thoroughly enjoyed this. I was originally hoping that I might find some of the church council minutes on when someone decided to introduce gas or electric light into their church building. Many of those sadly appear to have been lost, because I'm willing to bet they would have been fun. From experience of church councils recently, definitely.
Yeah.
But almost as good was going back and finding local newspaper reports about when the church lighting was switched on for the first time. And this would include complete accounts of the sermon preached on the occasion of the lighting the steeple lights, or lighting the gas lights in the church building for the first time.
Yeah.
And it was all about how, technology, science and technology, so I can't get away from the science really, is one of the gifts that we have from God as a means of bringing glory to God, of restoring creation. And there was a lot about, this isn't a bad thing, this is a good thing. And that we should really be embracing these new technologies and making use of them, and celebrating the fact that we know about them and know how to use them. But we lose some of that because we start the debate anew every single time we look at a new technology without realizing we've done this legwork before.
And one thing, when my granddad was alive, he was a local preacher, and he always used to use the example of people complained about bicycles or maybe motorbikes, I can't remember which one it was, and talk about how they're awful because they can take people away from church, and my granddad's response was, but they can also bring people to church, so they're in fact neutral things. It's just in the hands of those who choose to do those things. So it's just an interesting one, and I feel as if we should learn from history, shouldn't we? I'm going to move on, and keeping in mind our kind of reference of Independence Day, and dare I say a recent musical, I'm going to talk about Church the Musical. Sorry, that was a really bad link. I was going to go down the Hamilton link for those who are bothered. But this is maybe me being a bit more random. But I think just sometimes to shake church up a little bit, and have kind of church as like a musical from start to finish, not just a house band, but like almost just like a really orchestrated. I want to say maybe as a one-off. It can't be kind of regular, but just as like a set piece. From start to finish, of including stuff, and I guess that a presentation in church just for like a big festival, And the thing that I keep on coming back to is quite a long time ago now, there was the Manchester Passion, where it was televised, and they had quite contemporary music, and was it Keith Allen was kind of the presenter on it, and it was fantastic kind of way of conveying the Easter message with contemporary music throughout, and I really love it. And it's a shame that the BBC haven't put it back on again. I managed to find a bootleg copy in America, of all places, but yeah, just because I really liked it as a thing. But it's just a shame that either the BBC didn't return back to it or keep it on their library, on their database, because I just really like that idea, and not just like musical. I guess Church the Musical is a little bit kind of one down a certain avenue with a chorus and a dance on troupe, but I think it's just that idea of kind of having a set piece once in a while where we really kind of dig deep with the songs and put on this kind of reflective piece. And I know that we kind of have things like they do kind of, Church has done musical stuff before, like is it, I can't remember them off the top of my head now, but they had been a bit popular, but just kind of a bit more contemporary as well, and do some mainstream popular music, dare I say.
I've taken part in full-on choral masses and evensongs and things like that, and it's very much like that. It's hugely theatrical, and has all of those elements in there. But yeah, the music is, depending on your viewpoint, quite dated. I enjoy singing it. I quite enjoy listening to it, and enjoy going to those services on occasion. But I completely understand it's not for everyone. So a more contemporary version of that, I think, would be really interesting and very enjoyable.
Yeah, it's just like that idea, and I guess Hamilton has been in my back of my mind, and maybe not like You'll Be Back, but kind of I want to be in the room where it happens, talking about the Last Supper or something, or or kind of again the Manchester Passion one for me, and now it is dated, I know, but Jesus kind of singing to the disciples, "Sit down," by James, and it's just like that, using those kind of more contemporary stuff to explore theological themes and just again, and I guess maybe this is what kind of it dips into a bit about the Banksy as well, really. It's just like using another art form, another medium of exploring something without it just being very dry and talky, to kind of explore something in an uplifting sort of way. And again, I'm not expecting people to come out with the Methodist Church equivalent of the Book of Mormon, although I may be interested in watching that to do a Methodist version. Anyway, so I realise we're just kind of yakking back and forwards. Folks, is there anything that you want to add to any of these recent comments, things of history, of Banksy, of the church, the musical? Have you got any suggestions of any songs that we could include in our own musical version of the church, the musical? So over to people on comments. Please do chip in if you would like to.
I could offer one that I really enjoyed when I was quite a lot younger. I saw it because my grandma was in the choir for this. And Roger Jones has got a musical, Pharisee, which is essentially the story of Nicodemus, and it's great. Music's absolutely brilliant. In this case, the acting was really good as well, but it was full on sort of orchestra lights. I think there was a smoke machine possibly, but it told the story really, really well, in a way that there's songs from that 20 plus years later I still have in my head and can sing along to, and I've not heard it in that time.
Yeah, I was going to say, it just reminded me as well that when I was in Lincoln, I had a good friend who, just at the beginning of his theatrical journey, I think, which has continued to jump in leaps and bounds, but he took part in Jesus Christ Superstar at Lincoln Cathedral, and that was just awesome, because not only was it just a musical in Lincoln Cathedral in a church setting, but they'd also made the decision that they were going to be doing, I don't want to say street theatre, like they were in character throughout. As soon as you entered the building, it was kind of like, felt like you're going back in time, and everything from the marshals at the door were Centurion guards, and I just loved it for that kind of cheekiness. Oh, sorry. I've said something from Pat saying, is there a reason you didn't mention Liverpool nativity? I think it was a year or two after the Manchester Passion. Yeah, there is a reason, Pat. I didn't know about it. So that's why, because I just didn't know about it, that it existed. But I will have to try and find it after... and he's also said, by the way, Godspell changed my life. I was going to reference Godspell, but I haven't actually seen it. And I couldn't remember if it was a Christian one or if it was just a really random one, and I didn't want to embarrass myself. So thank you, Pat, for mentioning Godspell, because I just couldn't remember. There was hopes and dreams, wasn't there, and things like that. I'm not even going to put that comment on. But I agree with you, Pat. Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, kind of. Yeah, I just thought it was an interesting perspective on doing church differently and exploring those sort of themes in a bit, just shaking it up again, really. And I guess that's what all this is about, really. It's just ways of thinking about how we could shake things up a bit. Paul,
if I find a music list for the Liverpool Nativity, I've got dreadful visions of Little Donkey being played in weird and wonderful ways. But I can't find a list of the music, so I couldn't guarantee that.
Well, I'm gonna Google that. We might kind of increase the Google search of that by 250%, or 1,000%. Yeah, we'll. I'll have a look at that afterwards. Paul, I realise I've got one last one for yours. Did you want to go with your most recent one, or did you want to go back to your other one, or should we just incorporate both of them together on our list? Oops.
Pick one.
To be honest, it covers the same thing, doesn't it, in some respects? Or I'm assuming it does. So I'm going to throw up. By the way, Pat has actually shared the YouTube results for it. So I'm sure we can find that on YouTube afterwards. So thank you, Pat. So we're going to go to your next one. Again, Paul, this feels as if either you're running out of ideas or it is like a syllabus idea that you've done science, history, now literature. If the next one's going to be kind of drama or science...
Just wait for bring PE lessons.
Yeah. Then I might avoid that church.
50 laps around the chapel.
Pardon?
50 laps round the chapel and hurdle the pews.
Oh, no. Anyway, so would you like to introduce literature? Is this just kind of literacy skill? I guess that's literacy, isn't it?
Yeah.
But literature sort of thing. What are you
We're
thinking?
not going to go for literacy skills, because that might mean that someone checks me up on my grammar, spelling and punctuation, and I don't want that.
Preach it, brother.
I think literature for me is partly coming out of my absolute love of reading. I know that, like many younger children, I was read to a lot and regularly. I recall going sailing with my grandparents, and they would read some of the Arthur Ransom novels to me. And I was talking to my grandma the other day, and she reminded me of this. We were sailing, and we were in Hampford Water, which, if you don't know the area, is the region that Secret Water was set in, Arthur Ransom's novel Secret Water. So it's actually set there. So we were sailing there and reading the novel set there. And my granddad kept asking my grandma for something, so she kept putting the book down and going off. In the end, I got so fed up that I picked the book up and kept reading. and wouldn't let them pick up the reading again. And probably since roundabout then, it's almost impossible to get me to put a book down. I've got, wherever I go, there's something on my Kindle. There's enough novels around this house to start my own library, I suspect. And I just really enjoy reading. I enjoy stories of all sorts of different things, from historical novels to science fiction, fantasy. So the topic you were going, the other topic we could have picked would have been Terry Pratchett, and it's my absolute, I'd say probably is my favourite author. Partly for the way, actually, in a way that ties into my other topics, that Terry brings a lot of understanding of history, of folklore, of literature, of science into every single one of his novels, but in a way that's quite entertaining and enjoyable. There's some of those that I read first when I was a lot younger and have read since then, having studied some of the history or studied some of the science, and gone, oh, that's what he meant. That's really quite clever. And it's still hilarious.
Bless him. Is it GNU, Terry Pratchett? Rest in peace, and may his memory live on. That I'm a big fan of Terry Pratchett. I've got pretty much all of them. I think I've got all of them, but I've definitely read all of them. And I've got to say, occasionally I have dropped Terry Pratchett into a sermon, but I think because he's still because of the culture of church that I'm often preaching into, I don't think Terry Pratchett is as widely known as, dare I say, my generation compared to the generation of church that I often preach into. So I tend to feel that I have to really kind of introduce Pratchett really carefully and the story really carefully. But I've often used one passage from Going Postal numerous times to explore themes of tradition. Again, echoing back to what you were saying about traditions and things of church. And so it's with Junior Postmaster Grote, and Moist von Lipwig is really frustrated and is really in shock by the state of the post office, and all the letters are everywhere that have been left up on the side, and kind of Grote as just kind of oblivious almost to it, and Moist kind of goes, well, why haven't you posted these things, why haven't you done this? And he's there kind of going, well, it's not my job, and my job is to fill the inkwells and to make sure that the lamps are full, and it's just like, but if you're not posting a letter, then what is the point? And I quite like using that as that idea of, actually, well, if we're not being church, we could go through all the mechanisms of church, but if we're not trying to change people's lives, if we're not trying to fight up for social injustices, if we're not trying to kind of share the good news to folks, then we're going to miss the point. Anyway, sorry, that's my little sermon in a nutshell, but that's how I've used kind of Going Postal before, and I do like Moist von Lipwig as a character, but I do like Sam Vimes a bit more, I think. But then again, there's so many actually already. I'm there going, that's not doing justice to death personified, the death of rats. Anyway, and now I'm hijacking it, just talking about Terry Pratchett. So feel free to wade in.
I think we could have an entire evening just on the things that come out of Terry Pratchett, but it's quite it's a good example, because we already know how important stories are to get a message across and to make something understandable to people. But actually, we now have the problem that a lot of the parables, we tell them in the same format that Jesus told them, but they don't necessarily have the same meaning anymore, because our society is different. Where we are at in the world, physically where we're at in the world is quite different. So we're trying to bring a story from a completely different area in and make sense of it, when actually if we look, there's probably stories that do something similar. That would be accessible to people.
Yeah, and I think I've said that there's two areas of this that I would have to be careful of. One is making sure that you're not kind of doing the gospel a disservice by doing something maybe a bit more superficial, or something that doesn't really link as well. but I think there are plenty of good examples out there. The other thing is actually understanding the context of what you're presenting, or as in like the theme of the book or otherwise. And I've seen that done really badly, where someone's kind of gone, "Oh yes, this is a popular book. I'll mention this," and like a Harry Potter reference, or what was the other one that I'd thought about that I'd seen, and they're going to going, "Oh, you do not understand what you're referencing here. Like you've just picked out a little tiny thing, and yes, out of context, that is nice and novel, but actually you don't get it because you haven't read the rest of the books."
Yeah.
And so I think you, as long as you're really into it and you get it, but then it's also conveying that to people who may not have read it. And I guess, at least in church, hopefully people get the whole Bible thing as a core book. But yeah, maybe a reading list. For this Sunday, dabble with Terry Pratchett, dabble with this, and Stephen Hawking's A Brief History of Time. Just to get your little science nod in there. Yeah, a good use of literature would be good as well. Yeah, that would be good. And look forward to the Discworld special then of the Naked Chapel at some point. That would be fun.
They've got the science of the Discworld out. I don't think anyone's ever done a theology of the Discworld. I'm not sure I'd want to tackle it.
No, the thing I like about Discworld is that it's escapism, and that I don't have to then think about it. And I love the idea of the many gods with a small g, and it's just the absurdity, but the social commentary that Terry Pratchett did so very well. And I'm completely with you. I loved the way that he kind of presents things in such a quirky manner, and some of those things it's taken me years to actually understand the context of what he was actually talking about, and just suddenly going, that's what you meant. Okay, I had no idea of that reference until I kind of come to that kind of broader understanding of stuff. So our time has nearly come to an end. Folks, is there anything else left to say about Discworld, about literature, about Church the Musical, about history, Banksy, science, or a house band? Is there anything that you would like to share or otherwise? Or if not, we will come to a close. I'm just going to ponder and patter for a couple more moments unless there's any more comments. Thank you folks for joining us tonight, or if you've joined us another time. It would be good that if you like this slightly changed format, give us a comment whether you like this or prefer more of the crowd and the more of the holy rabble. But you can find us on Facebook and at the moment on Twitch, and again we'll be looking to see how that goes down as well, or if not we'll default back to YouTube, but we'll see how we go. So continue to make comments on our videos, or just comment to me on Facebook, Twitter, or otherwise. And thank you for tuning in. And anything anything last to say, Paul? Anything at all?
No, I think we've pretty much covered it this evening.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, folks. Thank you for joining us. And I've been Mark Stennett, and Paul has been on the tech as well as a guest in the room. Oh, we've just got a comment. Kate, thanks. And thank you, everybody who has commented. Hopefully we'll see you again soon. So God bless and goodbye.